Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Illustration Department Podcast. My name is Giuseppe Castellano. In this podcast, I talk to folks in illustration, graphic design, publishing, animation, and other creative fields about their work, the lessons they've learned, and the bumps and bruises they've experienced along the way. In this episode, my guest is illustrator, author, and son of Patricia and Richard Scarry, Huck Scarry. When you illustrate what you illustrate all day, are you having any fun? As life seemingly gets busier and more chaotic, it's important that you do. Among other topics, we talk about Richard Scarry's life and artistic process. Huck shares how his father made his way through Busytown, from color palettes to car accidents. And Huck tells illustrators what his father would tell illustrators if they were to ask him for advice. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
My grandfather had a department store. I think it was a men's clothing store. I have a photo of it here. Right. And I think that it was his dream that his sons would take this on. But obviously that was not the line of work that my father wanted to do at all. I don't know the details, but I could very well imagine that my grandmother had some influence on him and said, let Richard do what he wants to do. He wants to study art. She took him when he was younger to the Boston Museum to follow art courses.
Right.
And he was apparently good at it. So she said, let's let Richard give it a go. He went to art school. He loved being there, apparently. Then it got interrupted with the war. And then he was sent off to the army.
Yeah. I think most illustrators listening to this can relate to having a parent or parents or some caregiver not support their dreams of being an artist.
It's a big problem for a lot of creative people. I'm a father of 4 kids. I give my kids, or I have given my kids, I think, all the freedom that they needed or wanted to pursue the things that they had on their heart. And my wife also was always extremely supportive of them and continues to be. I think it's important to understand that a child is not your property, that a child grows up into somebody who can be quite different than you. Thank goodness. Right. The beauty of life is that everybody's different. We're all a bit different. We all have our particular talents and our particular weaknesses. And everybody should pretty much be allowed to do what they have on their heart. If it's not what you would like them to do, that's not their problem, it's your problem. And you've got to get over it. You never know what's coming your way. But that's the beauty of life. And then embracing or maybe discovering what your child had on their heart and seeing, like in my father's case, what a wonderful thing he was able to do.
Of course.
It would have been a great tragedy had he, not a tragedy, but it would have been a great loss if my father had been working at a department store when he could be making books.
For the war effort, your father drew maps and illustrated propaganda. Meanwhile, and this is something that I always find so interesting about World War II and illustration and where those two things intersect, Stan Berenstain of Berenstain Bears fame was producing medical illustrations. Theodore Seuss Geisel, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss, was directing training films. Will Eisner created reference manuals. Ashley Bryan, who was a podcast guest, he was a stevedore who stormed the beaches of Normandy. There's another illustrator. His name is Van Kaufman. He would, after the war, go on to create the best examples of fine art in automobile advertising, as was stated by Norman Rockwell, of all people. He served under Dr. Seuss. After the war, Kaufman started his illustration career. A friend of his was having a tough time finding a foothold as an illustrator, so Kaufman handed off some of his client work to this friend. The friend I'm referring to is your dad. Does Kaufman ring a bell at all?
Yes, I've heard that name before, but a long, long time ago. And I really just learned now what you are explaining to me. And it's very possible indeed that this is the case. My father did some brochures for Ford
Right.
with my mother. My mother was writing these brochures, and these brochures were very, very simple, black line, one color of lithograph. And these brochures were for what was called the Ford Rotunda. I have a friend here who collects editions of my father's work, and she's gotten a hold of a few of these, and I've seen them. They're really very, very charming, and it's fun to see my father's characters mixed in with these very accurate illustrations, drawings of Ford motor cars. I think that my father did the cars himself, but as you say that this fellow Van Kaufman was making illustrations of the cars, it's possible that they collaborated on these together. This
Yeah.
I don't know.
After the war, your dad got his break when Lucille
Mm-hmm.
Ogle, she co-founded Little Golden Books in 1942.
Mm-hmm.
She hired him to illustrate Catherine and Byron Jackson's Mouse's House.
Yes.
Is that his first book?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know, of course, a lot about these things that happened before I was around. And of course, I was born in 1953. I only started learning about details or business details when I got a bit older. But what I do know is that he got a commission from Golden Books to illustrate several books in 1 year. The first year that my father worked, which I think was in 1949 for Golden Books, my father did several books, among them a book called Boss of the Barnyard, which again was just black line with one color of lithograph. He did another book called Two Little Miners. And actually the first book that is really attributed to being my father's first book that he illustrated is this Two Little Miners, a copy of which I still have downstairs. It's a very cute book. He did several books, and the sums of money to us today look very, very little, but apparently you could live very well on what my father was earning at the time. And my parents used that money, which they had saved up through these first books, then to take off and go for several months on a trip to Europe for their honeymoon in 1950. And then came back, and my father got to work again on the next batch.
Fast forward about 8 years. We're now in 1963. Golden Press publishes Richard Scarry's best word book ever. This book, in my opinion, and subsequent books, the art you see in these books is what people think about when they think about Richard Scarry, not really the painterly style of Mouse's House or Smokey the Bear, which is gorgeous, but this is really what people think about with Scarry's art. What I find interesting about his entire body of work, really, but this specifically, is that he doesn't necessarily follow all the tenets of what makes a good illustration good. For example, I'll give you a couple of examples. One is, generally speaking, you want a focal point, a primary focal point that's your main character, usually a secondary focal point, etc. Generally speaking, you want to keep your colors fairly limited, because if you don't, it will look cluttered and messy and unplanned. He doesn't really do any of that. He does his own thing and it works. How does it work?
My father was a very practical person, and he was also an amazing designer. And there's a lot behind the look of his books. And as you say, for many, many years, he did what I call his painterly style, which is like Good Night, Little Bear, or even I Am a Bunny, which are beautiful. But here he was confronted with something new that he had in front of him to do. He wanted to make a book for children, which was a visual dictionary. In other words, giving lots of words to children to learn, to see, and explaining them by just showing them and labeling them. And where did he get this idea from? He found it in a German picture dictionary, which was very well known in Germany. It's called the Duden, D-U-D-E-N. If you ask any German, what's Duden? And every German knows what a Duden is. It's a picture dictionary. Mm-hmm. And he saw this. It was a great big thick book with several hundred pages in it. And on each page were black and white drawings based on a theme. So there would be a hospital operating room. There would be a railway station. There would be a country lane. There would be a farm. In those illustrations are hundreds and hundreds of items, and each item has a number. Each number corresponds to an index at the foot of the page, which gives you the name of what it is that you're looking at. And my father said, wow, there's something in here that I could do for kids. And instead of putting numbers for all the objects, he simply labeled them. Of course, he put in far fewer objects than you might find in, let's say, a kitchen scene from the Duden, but he filled that kitchen that he drew in his book, filled with colanders and spoons and ladles and pots and pans, and he simply labeled everything. This was his idea. It wasn't a commission from Golden Books. He saw this, and it was his idea, which he presented to Golden Books. Mm-hmm. The publisher said, well, this is simply the best word book ever. And that's the title that stuck.
Oh my God!
Subsequently, his other books, of course, also many of them have this best ever formula. Mm-hmm. The other thing that my father needed to do with the design of this book was a very practical one. He couldn't paint everything with shadowing or perspective and lights and shadow. He would be wasting tons of time trying to get everything right. So he did it very simply with very flat colors. So there might be a blue teapot, a red coffee pot, copper-colored ladles, and chrome-colored spoons, and so forth. Right. And what he did is he drew everything, in this instance with a pen, like a rapidograph. Later he would go on to make his drawings in pencil. But what he would do is he would draw the entire book on tracing paper, actually a plastic acetate sheet, what is called frosted acetate, which he could erase easier on if he made a mistake. And it was a little bit more sturdy than tracing paper. Okay. And he made his entire book just in black and white. And when those black and white double spreads were finished, they would go off to the photo engraver. The photo engraver would take photographs of each spread and make offset printing film in black line, which would then be printed in a very, very pale blue ink on illustration paper, like watercolor paper. This technique became known as blueboarding. The actual technique is called blueboards. And I don't think that my father invented this technique. I think it was something that other people were doing at the time. But what it did is that it enabled him to get back these blue boards in very pale blue with the black line overlay as a guidance. And he could simply go through his entire book and color everything in at a fairly quick pace. And he would always go one color at a time, and he would fill up everything that he thought needed to be one particular color. And when he was finished with that, he'd go on to the next color and on again until he had finished filling in all the spaces that need to be colored. And I used to help my father later on. I helped him notably with Cars and Trucks and Things That Go and a couple of others. And it was a big job because my father loved to fill his pages with lots of things. A bit tiring to do on your own, but if you did it with somebody else, it was a lot more fun. Yeah. But he insisted that we would start with red. And once I said to my father, Dad, why do we always start with red? And he turned to me with all seriousness and said, I like red. And so I couldn't argue with that.
I mean, who can?
Yeah, so there we were. So what this also did, because you've covered a lot of things in your introduction here, what this also did is that it had a huge impact on his color palette. Because using this technique, there is a total harmony and a balance of the different colors used. So, for instance, he would start off with red,
Yeah.
and we would paint everything that needed to be red: fire engines, stoplights, apples, animals' tongues, certain pieces of clothing, cars.
Sure.
And then you'd go on to eyes draining yellow, and then you'd go on to orange, and you go to blue and to green. And gradually filling up the book, these spreads gave him a total harmonious balance from one spread to the next. There was never a spread where there was too much red, except maybe for a spread where you might have a lot of fire engines on it. But that's part of what gives his books this great freshness of color.
Oh, for sure.
The other thing,
Yeah.
my father used a white background. Why did he use white? Because all the colors pop off the page so beautifully. It also is such that there is a perspective in these books, but a very, very subtle one, maybe close to what you might call, in French is called cavalier, which means cavalier is a person who sits on top of a horse and sees the world from up above a little bit and looks down. Sure. And architects have used cavalier perspective for the architectural renderings and drawings. And my father used it. And where did he get this idea? My father loved the painting of Peter Bruegel. And there is a Peter Bruegel painting, which I believe today is in Vienna in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. And it's called Children's Games. Very large picture of a square somewhere in Belgium. And on that square are dozens and dozens and dozens of children playing different children's games. They are all on a very, very beige background. They don't overlap with one another too much. It's sort of a picture dictionary of all the different games that children play. And my father looked at this picture and he said, there's my perspective. And that's what he used for the rest of his life. It's this very flat perspective where you simply have a white background and there's no fleeting perspective. There's no horizon anywhere. The horizon would be much higher up off the page, if you wish, because we're sort of looking down, but at the same time looking from the side at everybody who's in the scene. And it works. As I say, he threw the illustrator's rules book out of the window, and he did it his way. And it was totally him.
I read that there was a bit of pushback from the children's publishing establishment on your father. In other words, like, he had a way of working. He was quite successful at it. But in terms of maybe style or how they sort of perceived the artistry of the work, is any of that true?
I love libraries and I love librarians.
Yeah.
But when my father was making these books, a lot of librarians didn't like his books. Or I would say that it wasn't that they didn't like his books, but they didn't consider them books. They weren't books to read. I think a lot of librarians sort of thought, well, these are too easy to read. There's not enough text in them. They're not really what you would call a book in those days. That evolved, of course. Now, now he's a classic, which is very funny and very charming, and he would be delighted by that. Sure. Another aspect is that his publishers wanted to be sure that he was being aware of the modern age, modern times. There was the women's liberation movement, which took place, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s. Although his publisher, I don't think, asked him anything in particular, my father made a definite nod towards the women's liberation movement, which I think that he took seriously. So my father put in demonstratively, for instance, in Cars and Trucks and Things That Go, Officer Flossie, who is a police lady on a bike. And he's chasing Terrible Dingo Dog, who's a terrible driver. And he put in little Mistress Mouse, a tiny little mouse in a pink tow truck. And she's She's a mechanic, and she's
Yeah.
teeny weeny, but there's no truck too big or heavy that she can't pull with the hook of her little tow truck.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly felt that every sex and every type of person should be treated equally and respectfully.
Yeah.
And yes, he was aware of that, and he did what he could to be fair about it.
When did you start working with your dad?
My father sadly had a problem with his eyes when he grew older. Everything was starting to turn dark, and he often had to work with several very strong lamps blazing at his drawing table to see properly. And it was obviously very frustrating for him.
For sure.
I helped him color books, so I was helping him with Cars and Trucks and Things That Go. So that would have been, it was published in 1974, so I would have done that in 1973. So in those years when I had school holidays or I had some time available to give him a hand, I would help him color books. And one day, one of his publishers said, Huck can color your books. Maybe Huck could give you a hand drawing your books. And my father said, well, maybe. The publisher said, you can supervise him and go over things. And so I gave it a try. And I shudder and wince when I see my first attempts trying to epitomize my father's world.
Right.
But eventually I sort of got the knack of it. And now it goes very, very naturally for me.
Yeah.
And I notice the difference myself. I can see instantly something that's done by me and something that's done by my father. But the greatest compliment for me is when people don't notice the difference between the two. Yeah. And that's a great compliment to me. Yeah. The one thing, quite apart from imitating his drawing style, is imitating his spirit. But I have the greatest time doing that. My father was sometimes a little bit impish among other people. And sometimes people would say, Richard, how old are you anyway? And my father would put up one hand and spread his fingers. He was 5 years old. And he really was 5 years old oftentimes.
Right.
That's not to say that he wasn't somebody who was responsible, but he could go off the handle sometimes and just be a playful little boy, which I assume is one of the reasons why he could dialogue so well with little children and do it so well. My father never lost the beauty of being a child. He knew that there's a magic in retaining that innocence, of retaining your curiosity about things, of getting excited about the simplest things, whether it's a steam locomotive or a fire engine or the beauty of a tree or of a flower. He got excited by these things, or little insects. He puts into his books all sorts of little insects, which anybody else would say, oh, those are just insects. They're not of interest to anybody. But you look at some of his books and he makes these beautiful drawings of insects. And of course, he made a worm his most favorite character, and Goldbug, who's a little tiny bug. And he delighted in putting them into his books, and children love to see them too. Yeah. When I think of myself and somebody asks me, well, how old do you feel? Well, I put up two hands. I'm the 10-year-old. And we made this trip to Europe in 1963 when I was 10 years old. And that's my time. I am the little boy with his head stuck out of the train window, looking at all the landscapes going by and getting excited about all the things I'm seeing. And when I work on my father's books, I can become even more of a child and take 5 years off and become a 5-year-old. And I just delight and let myself go. When I do my father's books, I say, let's go off the handle here. Yeah. Let's just have fun here.
Exactly.
And so you just let go and have fun. Yeah. It makes your illustrations fun because you're having a good time and you're laughing. My father laughed all the time when he was at his drawing board. And one of the things that I adore when I'm drawing his characters is that I often find myself laughing or at least smiling. And if you can do a job during the day where you smile and laugh at what you're doing, you've got it made.
This podcast is produced by the Illustration Department, a global leader in online education for illustrators. Visit illustrationdept.com for offerings like mentorships and portfolio reviews, testimonials, our alumni showcase, our best-selling Substack, and more. That's illustrationdept.com. And now, back to our conversation. I think that is one, if there are multiple secrets of his success, certainly having fun with what he was doing. Being tapped into that 5-year-old would be 2. Another one would be essentially respect the children. You had said in an interview once that, his singular purpose was to entertain kids, to be funny without being stupid, to do it in a way that isn't done a million times. Whatever he was trying to do, his job was to not be boring with his work. So are these elements together the secret to why he was so successful?
Oh, well, there's certainly not one reason why. But basically, what my father created is a place where you like to be.
Yeah.
Busytown is a nice place. And Busytown is everywhere. Where you live, in the city, in New York, or wherever, where I am here up in the mountains in Gstaad. Yeah. But basically, when you see the people in Busytown going about their work or having problems and having adventures, these are basically neighborhoods that anybody could and should have around them. And one of the nice things about Busytown is that everybody sort of tries to do their best. They're happy at the work that they do. Right. They try and get things right, although there are always myriad accidents that happen, which makes Busytown fun and unpredictable. Sure. In our house, everything was breaking all the time. My father created this character called Mr. Frumble. He's very, very much based on my father. My father was constantly accidentally breaking things. But he could always laugh about it and say, oh, well, right. That's gone. Well, we have to get another one. And but he saw the funniness of accidents.
Yeah.
I always say that my father made very, very funny books because he was a very funny man. Because he was funny, he saw the funny things happening around him. And he was also a very curious man. Like a child, he was curious about why is this way and why is it not the other way. So he was always looking at things with a fresh eye. So yes, those elements are something which are very much a part of what makes him a popular author. He makes the child and the parent feel good about where they are in Busytown. It's a place where you want to be, and it's also a place which strengthens a child's sense of self-value. If you feel good about yourself in a place, you can do good things for other people.
Well said. Speaking of characters, Huck, there is a character named Hucklecat.
That's correct.
And I guess, I'm assuming, you tell me, but is that where your nickname comes from?
Yes. Well, no. No, it doesn't. My nickname comes from Huckleberry Finn. Oh. When I was born, I don't know why, but my parents called me Richard. My real name is Richard, like my father. And funnily, I'm not Richard Jr. On my birth certificate, it's Richard II. So I'm sort of like a prince or a king. Anyway, when my father held me for the first time in the hospital room, he said, "This is a little Huckleberry Finn." And it stuck. My father liked the story of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and he liked the writings of Mark Twain. And so I was never called Richard at home. I was always called Huck. It's curious because then my mother started to call me, as an endearing tone, like Huckleberry. Instead of Huckleberry, she would call me Hucklebear. Hucklebear, breakfast is ready. Hucklebear, it's time for bed.
And there was a Hucklebear character before Hucklecat.
This is correct. And Hucklebear appeared in Storybook Dictionary. the Bear family. And again, my father's love for Austria and Tyrol, he put the Bear family into Tyrolean outfits,
Sure.
including a set of lederhosen for
Sure.
Huckleberry. But anyway, I started off as a little bear in my father's books, as Huckleberry.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you why he became a cat later on. I can only possibly imagine because he changed publishers.
Huh.
The Storybook Dictionary was done still for Golden Books, which was
Right.
Western Publishing.
Sure.
And my father then later changed to Random House, to Golden Books' great chagrin when they realized that they should have perhaps offered him a little bit more what he was hoping to receive in payments for his work. That had the effect of changing some of his characters so that he wouldn't be taking characters which were being used by the other publisher
Right.
at the new publishers. And I think that I first appeared as a Huckle Cat in Great Big Schoolhouse, which is a Random House book.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I became a cat instead of a bear. I can't guarantee that this is the truth, but that's what I sense.
One of the things that you said to me in another conversation was that your father was quite focused on his own work. In other words, like he wasn't super concerned about how other people were doing whatever it was that they were doing. But I suspect he had relationships, rubbed shoulders with many of the illustrators that, listeners of this episode would recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Who would that include?
Well, first and foremost would be John Parr Miller. And John Parr Miller was an adorable person. And very funnily, my father and he were very close friends.
Yeah.
They were very, very much alike in their characters and very different at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And they also they physically resembled each other very much. They both wore horn-rimmed glasses. They had the same sort of style of haircut, and they looked as if they could be brothers. Mm-hmm. John Parr Miller was almost a brother to my father, and the fact that he lived with us in our family home for long, long periods of time, and he became my Uncle John. He was almost a member of the family, if you wish. And John Miller was a wonderful illustrator, and his work also, my father's early work, strongly resembles John Miller's work, and vice versa.
That mid-century style. Mm-hmm.
Well, style of the 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
They both did books where there were oftentimes farm animals. Mm-hmm. And we lived on a farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut, in a little cottage that was on a real working farm. It was called the Conklin Farm. And Mr. Conklin had tractors, and he had horses, and he had cows, and he had pigs, and everything that you would find on a farm in a Richard Scarry book. Uncle John spent a lot of time with us in Ridgefield, and he also put in to his illustrations many of the same sorts of characters and treated them. Both my father and Uncle John had a drawing style. John's style was perhaps a little bit more stylized. In other words, he would sometimes stretch his characters a bit. And he also had a fabulous sense of design.
Oh,
he also avoided very much that fleeting perspective. Mm-hmm. And he was an adorable person. And I'm very lucky to still have a couple of drawings done by John. Done by John Miller, which I have here. Mm-hmm. I look at them with great fondness because he was a very, very lovable and very funny and sweet person.
What was he doing living with you?
He was concentrating on meeting his deadline. John Miller was a wonderful illustrator, but he was a total perfectionist. And I remember I had a bedroom, and then I had a toy room, and he would sometimes stay in our toy room, and he was at a desk there, and I remember him vividly making an illustration of a monkey in a tree. Yeah. This monkey, he was trying to do the tail just the right way, and he would have the tail curl to the left, and then he would try having the curve to the right, and he wasted an awful lot of time trying to get everything just right. It was his way of doing things, but he wasn't sort of what you would call the spontaneous artist. Everything had to be thought out. And my mother would bring him lunch, sandwiches up on a tray like she would do with my father, and he would have to get his work done away from any other distractions that he might have in New York.
That makes sense. That's every writer and illustrator's dream. Every time I daydream about just wanting to focus entirely on my own writing or drawing or painting, I always envision myself completely by myself, separated from day-to-day goings on, some like remote farm or barn or something.
He needed that.
Who else did your father know?
Other good friends of my parents, who I knew a little bit less well, were the Provensens, Alice and Martin Provensen, who lived in not too far away from where we lived in Ridgefield, but it was in New York State, upstate. Right. And they would go up. A whole group of them would go up from New York or from Connecticut up to the Provensens, and it became a tradition to have the 4th of July at the Provensens. There would be a raising of the flag. People would pretend to be in the army, and they would do skeet shooting.
I'm currently Googling how to invent a time machine so I can hang out on a 4th of July weekend at the Provincens. That's something that's my goal for today, is figuring out how to do that.
So I know that there was an illustrator called Battaglia who was Italian.
Oh my God, Aurelius Battaglia.
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And John Miller was there, the Provincens were there, my parents were there, and I'm sure half a dozen other illustrators or writers were there too.
Please take me to that place. Oh my gosh.
Well, I have photos downstairs and old albums.
Here's what I'm hoping over the next couple of years happens, Huck. There is a Richard Scarry. Let's see, when was your dad born?
1919.
1919. So in 2029, preferably at the Brandywine Museum of Art, which is very close to where I live, a Richard Scarry exhibition, which these photographs are exhibited as well, as is the art of these other illustrators with whom your father hung out. That would be an incredible exhibition.
Okay. Well, you may not have to wait quite so long.
Oh?
There are things in the pipeline at the moment. I don't want to go into any detail. I don't want to spill any beans, but you might get that. You might get that before 2029.
You can't see me, but I have a huge dumb grin on my face.
Okay.
That sounds amazing. I'm afraid to bring this up. I'm worried that your response won't be what I hope it will be, but I have some very sort of tangential connection to your father's work. When I was a very young designer at Simon & Schuster, I had the pleasure of designing the overall line look and leading the art direction for books based on CBS's The Busytown Mysteries, which I don't think lasted very long, maybe a couple of years. Anyway, there are plenty of contemporary shows and movies and things that are based on children's books that I just think are absolute disgraceful hackeries, like 2010's Alice in Wonderland is terrible. Clifford the Big Red Dog in 2021, awful. The 2026 Cat in the Hat is not looking good. We would use stills mostly and some copy artists for the interiors of the books and the covers, get them approved by CBS and so on. And again, this only lasted a couple of seasons. Were you involved in that at all?
Sadly, no, not for that particular series. There were three distinct animated series done. One was done by Random House in the 1990s or 1980s.
Right.
And they had a division called Random House Home Video, under the direction of Ole Riesen, my father's art director, and Peter Eastman, who was the son of P.D. Eastman from Go Dog Go, who was also a friend of ours.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
And they created a series of 5 home videos, which were very sort of simple in their artistic rendition, and they weren't terribly faithful to the artistic rendition of the books, but the content was amazing. There were loads of songs. They were funny. they were totally in the spirit of my father. And my father approved these videos. After my father died, or just sort of at the same period where in 1994, when my father passed away, we were approached by Paramount and an animation studio called Eisner in Montreal to create a series called The Busy World of Richard Scarry. And I worked on just about every conceivable element in that series as regards approvals, whether it be the storylines, the storyboards, the voices, the dialogues, the look of the characters, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. It ate up a lot of my time, but I had a wonderful time, and it was an exciting experience to work with so many other creative people in other fields, like with speech artists, musicians, animation artists. It was a lot of fun.
Sure.
And they were very, very respectful of my point of view. I think they did a very, very good series. We did 62 episodes. So in other words, 62 half hours. It was a big freight train. Following that, some years later, we were approached by another company who had purchased the content of CNR and wanted to make a new series. I agreed to it. The people seemed okay. I thought that I would be working with a number of the people who I had worked with on the first series. Well, it didn't turn out that way at all. It was a huge disappointment. I won't say that everything about it was bad, but it certainly didn't have the same quality as the first series. Yeah. And they also didn't really listen to me as often as they could have or should have.
But the books were wonderful. No, I'm kidding.
Well, they had certain rights. Whenever you're dealing with animation or merchandise, etc., there are always things that you have to agree to, or you have to at least negotiate. And one of the things that they wanted to do was that they wanted to do publishing based upon their animated series. In essence, I didn't really have anything against that when I was signing on to this new venture, because they were going to be creating original work, and I couldn't see that I would take on that original work and make books from it because I didn't create the stories. So, I mean, it was, to me, only logical that they would be their books. But of course, the books could only be as good or halfway as good as the animated series. And they look it, I have to say.
I can respect
Happily, they didn't do too much. It's very sweet and a nice connection that you were involved with the overall graphic view of the thing. And I have no problem with that. But the books are what they are, and the content is what it is. That said, a lot of people adore some of those stories. And some of the stories are very, very cute and very well done, but they aren't exactly what I would have liked to have seen them become.
I can appreciate that. That's fair. I was worried you were going to say the books are the worst things I've ever seen and an abomination to my father's legacy.
Well,
at which point I would have obviously...
I'll tell you from my heart, I have examples of these books, and happily there aren't too many of them. And happily one doesn't come across them too often. But they certainly aren't something that I am proud of, and certainly not something that my father would be proud of, because they just aren't. Okay. They just aren't his world. That's something else.
I can appreciate that. I respect your honesty. Speaking of honesty, your grandfather told your father in the early years of your father's life that maybe you shouldn't be an artist because if you were to become one, you'd end up living in a garret, which is basically an attic, eating nothing but spaghetti.
Mm-hmm.
A, as an Italian, I'm sitting here thinking, well, what's wrong with that? And B, thank goodness your grandfather was wrong.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure that my father, when my grandfather said that to him, my father said, well, I can't dream of anything better than to eat spaghetti every day.
I'm with your dad.
Yes.
I'm with your dad.
And to live in a garret can also be very nice. You can have
You
can have a view, a rooftop view. You look at the sky. And it can be very nice. It might be cold in winter, and it might be hot in summer, and you might have lots of stairs to go up. But
that's what fans and coats are for.
Yeah, and I think that if you have the opportunity to do what you want to do, and you have a stone in your heart that wants to get out, and you want to express what you have in that heart that you want to share with other people, then you'd be happy to eat spaghetti every other day and maybe nothing in between. If you had the liberty to do the things that you want to do. That's the most wonderful thing that you can aspire to in life, is to
Couldn't agree more.
to be able to do something that's halfway what it is that you want to do and that you want to express.
Yeah.
And in my work, I try and do that. It's not always possible to do that, but I aspire to do that, and I try to make the best of things, to do things as well as I can and to the closest to my dreams. And sometimes you have those opportunities to do them, and other times you have to make concessions, or you don't have all the time to do those things. But somehow, if you can make it work pretty much, I think that one's pretty lucky.
Agreed. What do you think your father would say if I were to ask him to share a piece of advice for illustrators listening to this episode? What do you think he would say?
Well, he would say very simply, and he even did say it to a colleague, and he said that if you're not having fun at what you're doing something wrong. And it's really that simple, because you can only do good work if you're having fun with it. I would say that an architect who's building a building, if he doesn't have fun building his building, he's not going to make an interesting or fun building. A dancer who is not having fun dancing on the stage is not going to do a very good rendition of their dance.
Right.
A writer will struggle to make his story, but ultimately, if he doesn't have fun with it, it might even be a very tragic or a sad story, but if he doesn't have fun with it, then he's not going to write a good story. And the only way that you can do good work is to have fun with it. That's the secret in life. I mean, if you can do something that you love doing, if you can express yourself and you can share through writing or through theater or through drawing or painting or through music, something that you have in your heart and you can share it with others, that's the tops. You can't do better than that. And I would go further to say that any artistic occupation is really one of the best things that you can possibly do for humanity, because art is what gives us hope, and art is what gives sense to life.
To learn more about Richard Scarry, visit richardscarry.com. If you find value in this podcast, you can support it by subscribing to my best-selling Substack. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you will access hundreds of articles on the art, practice, and history of illustration, unlock bonus podcast episodes called Extra Credit, and connect with other members of the ID community. Join me on Substack by visiting illustrationdept.substack.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.